You think you know Scandinavian folklore, but hidden beneath the heroic tales and fabled creatures are stories of fear, danger, and secrets your ancestors dared not speak aloud. What if these myths weren't just entertainment, but warnings? Picture this: a forest in midwinter, where birch trees stand pale as bone against endless snow. The sun barely rises, casting long shadows that stretch across frozen earth. In this realm of twilight and silence, where day and night blur into one another, something ancient stirs. The wind carries whispers through the pines, voices that sound almost human but not quite. Footsteps crunch in the snow behind you, yet when you turn, nothing is there. Only the forest, watching, waiting. This is the landscape where Scandinavian folklore was born, not in castle halls or sunny meadows, but in the dark spaces between civilization and wilderness. In the long winters when people huddled by firelight, telling stories that made children clutch their blankets tighter. Stories that kept travelers on marked paths. Stories that taught respect for boundaries both seen and unseen. But these weren't just stories. Scandinavian folklore, encompassing the myths and legends of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, and Finland, forms one of the world's richest traditions of supernatural storytelling. While Norse mythology gave us Thor and Odin, it's the folk tales, the local legends whispered from generation to generation, that reveal something deeper about the human psyche. These stories don't exist in the realm of gods and cosmic battles. They live in the everyday world, in forests where people gathered firewood, in lakes where they fished, in mountain passes they had to cross. They're intimate, personal, terrifying. On the surface, many appear simple. Cautionary tales about respecting nature, warnings against vanity or greed, explanations for mysterious phenomena. A beautiful woman in the forest, a haunting melody from the water. A creature that walks at night. But dig deeper and you discover something unsettling. These folk tales weren't created to entertain. They were survival mechanisms, psychological boundaries, ways of processing trauma, death, and the incomprehensible darkness that surrounded isolated communities for months at a time. They encoded ancient knowledge about danger, both physical and moral, in ways that pure reason couldn't capture. What if the darkness in Scandinavian folklore isn't metaphorical at all? What if these stories are hiding truths that modern minds have forgotten how to see? Let's begin with what appears innocent. What folklore presents to the casual observer. In Norwegian and Swedish folklore, the Huldra appears as a stunningly beautiful woman who lives in the forest. She has long flowing hair, often blonde, and wears traditional dress. To a lonely hunter or woodcutter, she seems like a dream made flesh. The story goes, if you encounter the Huldra, she may seduce you, even marry you, if you treat her with respect. She can bring fortune to your household, protect your livestock, and share ancient knowledge of the forest. Some tales speak of happy marriages between humans and Huldra folk that lasted decades. The only peculiarity? Seen from behind, she has a tail, like a cow's or a fox's, and her back is hollow, like a rotted tree trunk. Then there's the Nøkken, known in Norway and Denmark, or Nøkken in Sweden. This creature lives in lakes, rivers, and streams, appearing most often as a handsome young man playing a violin with otherworldly skill. His music is so beautiful it makes listeners weep, so enchanting that people forget themselves entirely. The tales say the Nøkken teaches music to those who bring him offerings, a white lamb perhaps, or a specific type of snuff. Some of Scandinavia's greatest folk musicians supposedly learned their craft from the water spirit. He sits on rocks by moonlight, his music drifting across still water like mist. And when people approach, drawn by the haunting melody, he smiles. In Icelandic and Norwegian tradition, the Draugr are the undead, but not mindless zombies. These are dead who refuse to rest, often warriors or wealthy individuals buried with their treasures. They possess superhuman strength, can control weather, and guard their burial mounds jealously. Some stories portray them almost sympathetically, cursed to an existence between life and death, unable to find peace. Others depict them as pure malevolence, crushing intruders, spreading disease, driving men to madness with their presence. But folklore provided solutions: proper burial rites, respect for the dead, specific rituals to bind the restless to their graves. These stories seem straightforward, don't they? Nature spirits that demand respect, magical beings that can be negotiated with, undead that follow rules. They're almost comforting in their logic. But you're not seeing what's hidden underneath. Now we descend into the real darkness, the secrets encoded in metaphor and myth. Remember the beautiful woman with the hollow back and tail? Let's look again. The Huldra doesn't just seduce men, she abducts them. Once under her spell, they're rarely seen again. They disappear into the forest, and if they return at all, they return changed. Hollow. Some tales describe men who escape the Huldra's thrall as permanently broken, unable to reconnect with human society, wandering the edges of settlements like ghosts. Here's what folklore doesn't say directly. The Huldra represents the forest's power to consume. In societies where survival depended on careful management of resources and strict social bonds, a man who wandered too deep into the wilderness, whether hunting for too long, fleeing responsibilities, or simply losing himself to isolation, was a man lost to the community. The hollow back isn't just an identifying mark. It's a symbol of emptiness, of something that appears complete from one angle but is fundamentally absent from another. The Huldra is beautiful temptation that contains nothing, a void disguised as fulfillment. Some scholars suggest even darker origins. In the harshest winters, when communities faced starvation, individuals sometimes disappeared into the forest, either voluntarily to spare resources or forcibly, expelled by those who made impossible choices. The Huldra stories may encode this trauma, transforming human tragedy into supernatural inevitability. That beautiful music by the water, it's a death song. The full folklore makes this clear. The Nøkken's primary purpose isn't teaching musicians. It's drowning people, especially children. The music lures victims to the water's edge, and then they're pulled under, disappeared, gone. Water deaths were devastatingly common in Scandinavian communities. Drowning claimed countless lives. Children playing near lakes, farmers crossing rivers, fishermen caught in storms. But a child's body, missing in dark water, never recovered, creates a unique horror. There's no closure, no grave, no peace. The Nøkken gave form to this terror. It transformed random tragedy into something with intention, with rules. If you knew about the Nøkken, you'd watch your children near water. You'd avoid rivers at twilight. You'd respect the danger. But there's something more disturbing here. The Nøkken is always described as beautiful, charming, irresistible. This isn't accidental. It speaks to water's dual nature, life-giving and life-taking, necessary and deadly. Communities couldn't avoid water, couldn't fear it completely, because survival depended on it. The Nøkken embodies this impossible relationship, something you're drawn to that offers beauty and sustenance, but that can destroy you without warning or mercy. Some folklorists suggest another layer. The Nøkken represents forbidden desire itself, particularly sexual awakening and its dangers. In repressive societies, attraction that led away from approved matches toward risk or scandal could destroy lives as surely as drowning. The undead in Scandinavian folklore aren't like modern zombies. They're worse, because they remember who they were. Draugr are former people, warriors, farmers, chieftains, who've become corrupted by their own worst qualities. The greedy remain greedy in death, hoarding treasure none can use. The violent become more violent, attacking the living without reason. The prideful cannot rest, refusing to accept mortality. Here's the secret. Draugr stories are about moral decay. In societies without formal law enforcement, where reputation was everything and community cohesion meant survival, the greatest fear wasn't external enemies, it was internal corruption. What happens when someone accumulates too much power, too much wealth? When a strong man becomes a tyrant? When greed outweighs communal good? The Draugr represents those who corrupt completely. Death doesn't redeem them. It amplifies their flaws until they become monsters. They cannot rest because they refused balance in life. They cannot find peace because they created none for others. And here's what makes it truly dark. The Draugr is you. It's what any person becomes when they let their worst impulses dominate. The folklore is saying, control yourself, or become a monster that even death cannot cleanse. We haven't even touched the Mara yet, perhaps the darkest figure of all. The Mara, known across Scandinavia, is the source of the English word nightmare. She appears as a beautiful woman who sits on sleeping people's chests, causing paralysis, crushing pressure, terrifying visions, and sometimes death. Victims wake, if they wake, gasping, unable to move, having experienced absolute terror. We now recognize this as sleep paralysis, a neurological phenomenon, but folklore interpreted it differently. The Mara was sometimes said to be a person's own spirit, leaving their body at night to torment others. A woman might be Mara without knowing it, her unconscious self-attacking neighbors while she slept. The only way to stop her was to call her by name, to make her recognize what she'd become. Think about what this means. The monster isn't external. It's you. Your own darkness, unconscious and uncontrolled, harming others. The Mara folklore forced communities to confront uncomfortable truth. The greatest danger might come from within yourself, from parts of your psyche you cannot access or control. In societies where conformity was survival, where individual psychology had no framework for understanding, the Mara gave shape to internal darkness. Depression, rage, trauma, all the unacknowledged shadows became literal night terrors that you inflicted on others despite yourself. Do you see it now? The secret hiding in plain sight? Scandinavian folklore isn't about monsters in the forest, demons in the water, or zombies in burial mounds. It's about the darkness in human nature itself, about communities processing their own capacity for cruelty, their own internal dangers, their own psychological complexity without the language to discuss it directly. The Huldra is abandonment and emptiness disguised as beauty. The Nøkken is deadly attraction you cannot resist. The Draugr is moral corruption that outlasts death. The Mara is your own unconscious darkness attacking others. These aren't warnings about the supernatural. They're warnings about ourselves. So why did Scandinavian folklore encode darkness this way? Why not speak plainly about human weakness, psychological danger, moral corruption? Because plain speech doesn't survive. It doesn't transmit across generations. It doesn't stick a memory the way a haunting image does. A beautiful woman with a hollow back, music that drowns, a corpse that refuses to rest. These stories did something remarkable. They made abstract dangers concrete. They gave form to formless fears. A parent couldn't explain neurological sleep paralysis to a child, but they could tell them about the Mara. A community couldn't discuss the psychological dangers of isolation and how it destroys men's minds, but they could warn about the Huldra. Folklore served as a psychological immune system for communities without modern mental health frameworks, trauma therapy, or nuanced moral philosophy. It encoded survival information in memorable forms. It created boundaries without explicit rules. It taught children to recognize danger they couldn't yet understand rationally. But here's what's truly profound. These stories remain terrifying because the darkness they describe hasn't changed. We're still capable of abandonment, still drawn to deadly attractions, still vulnerable to moral corruption, still possessed by unconscious parts of ourselves we cannot control. The forests are smaller now, the lakes less mysterious. We have explanations for drowning, for sleep paralysis, for why people disappear into wilderness or depression. But the Huldra still waits in different forms, the hollow promises that consume our lives. The Nøkken still plays different music, the addictions and obsessions we cannot resist. The Draugr still walks, in those who corrupt completely and refuse to release their grip on power or wealth. The Mara still sits on our chests, in anxiety, trauma, the darkness we carry without knowing. Scandinavian folklore's dark secret isn't that monsters are real, it's that they were always human. We've journeyed through the dark heart of Scandinavian folklore and discovered what our ancestors knew instinctively. The most terrifying monsters are the ones we carry within ourselves. These stories endure not because they're quaint or exotic, but because they're true. Not literally. There are no Huldra in the forests, no Nøkken in the lakes, but psychologically, morally, profoundly. The next time you encounter a folk tale that seems simple, ask yourself, what darkness is this hiding? What truth was too terrible to speak plainly? What warning has been encoded in metaphor because explicit language would fail? The old storytellers knew something we're only beginning to remember. Some truths can only be told slant, through shadows and symbols. Some warnings only work when they terrify us into attention. So, the question isn't whether Scandinavian folklore is hiding a dark secret. The question is, are you ready to recognize that same darkness in yourself? The forest is watching, the water is singing, and somewhere in the darkness between sleep and waking, the stories continue, waiting for those brave enough to truly listen. What folklore traditions haunt you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more dark mythology from around the world, subscribe and let me know which culture's secrets we should uncover next.